From getting crushed by unfenced machinery to breathing in literal poison to working 16-hour shifts for pennies, this is why you wouldn't last 24 hours in a Victorian factory. And spoiler alert, while you think surviving a boring Zoom meeting makes you tough, Victorian kids were operating death traps at age 7. We're talking people who lost fingers before lunch and kept working. Families who chose between starvation and slow death by industrial disease. But here's the kicker. The factory owners knew it was deadly. They just didn't care because dead workers were cheaper to replace than safety equipment. Some even took out life insurance on employees and profited when they died. Pretty wild. But first, let's start with your very first hour and see exactly how fast you'd fail. It's 4 a.m. and you're stumbling through dark streets toward the factory district. The air already smells wrong. Coal smoke mixed with chemicals mixed with something you definitely shouldn't be breathing. You hear the factory before you see it, a constant roar that never stops, day or night, 7 days a week. Welcome to work. You push through the gates with hundreds of others. Except that kid next to you? He's 7. The woman on your left is 65 and can barely walk. That other child holding her mother's hand is 5, and this is her first day operating machinery that could rip her arm off. Today, this would be a crime scene. Back then, it was Tuesday. The noise hits like a physical wall. We're talking 120 decibels, same as standing next to a jet engine. Your ears immediately ring. People shout from 2 feet away and can't hear anything. This is where you'll spend the next 16 hours with zero ear protection, and what you see through the dim gaslight? Rows of massive machines with exposed belts, gears, and spinning parts. No safety guards, no warning signs, no emergency stops. Just raw mechanical power that doesn't care if your hand gets caught. The air quality is criminal. Cotton dust so thick you can see it floating like snow. Your lungs are shredding with every breath. In coal plants, it's black dust. In chemical factories, it's fumes that burn your throat. You're already coughing, and it's been 10 minutes. The foreman points you toward a spinning machine and shouts something you can't hear. You're supposed to just figure it out. No training, no safety briefing, just don't slow down production. Within the first hour, someone loses a finger. A woman cleaning cotton from a moving belt, because apparently they did that while machines were running, gets her hand caught. The belt rips her finger clean off. She screams, but you barely hear it over the noise. The foreman wraps her hand in a dirty rag and points her toward the door. No ambulance. No compensation. Just get out if you can't work. Everyone else keeps working. Barely look up, because this happens so often it's basically routine. You're thinking about quitting already, aren't you? But here are the rules. No bathroom breaks unless approved, which almost never happens. No water breaks even though you're sweating through your clothes. No sitting, no talking, no singing. And definitely no complaining, because 50 people outside would take your job instantly. Little Timmy next to you is falling asleep on his feet. He's been doing these shifts since he was 5. Missing 2 fingers on his left hand, burn scar across his face from a boiler. He's 8 years old. This is hour 1 of 16. By hour 3, your body is shutting down. But you have quotas. Textile mills? Tend 1,000 spindles per hour. Coal sorting? Move 50 buckets. Fall behind and you get fined. Fall behind too much and you get beaten. Yeah, beaten. Overseers carried sticks specifically for hitting slow workers, especially children. Records show beatings were so common workers considered them part of the job. Late? Whipped. Talking? Whipped. Bathroom break too long? Whipped. Falling asleep? Whipped. When little Sarah next to you nods off, the foreman smacks her across the back with a stick. She's 9. She jerks awake, crying, and keeps working. What else is she gonna do? Now let's talk about machinery accidents because this is where things get really dark. Victorian machines were designed by people who hated safety, exposed gears, unguarded belts, spinning drums with no barriers. And they never stopped. So when someone needed to clear a jam, they did it while everything was still moving. This is how people got scalped. Women with long hair would lean too close to a spinning belt. The machine would catch their hair and literally rip their scalp off their skull. Some survived but were permanently disfigured. Others bled out on the factory floor while everyone kept working because stopping production meant everyone lost wages. Arm caught in the gears? Best case, you lost the arm. Worst case, the machine pulled you in and crushed your entire body. No emergency shut-offs, no panic buttons, just you screaming while the machine ground you up. Pretty crazy when you think about it. Around hour 6, you hit, quote, 0, which is 15 minutes to shove food in your face. Most workers brought bread, just dry bread, maybe cheese if lucky. The really poor ones brought nothing and drank water. And that water, probably contaminated. Cholera was spreading because nobody understood germs yet. You're drinking from the same pump downstream from the factory's chemical runoff. Some factories had canteens, but the prices were robbery. Soup that cost 1 penny outside cost 3 inside. And you couldn't leave because that meant you'd be fined for being late back. By hour 8, someone collapses from heat exhaustion. Victorian factories hit 100 degrees in summer from all the machines and zero ventilation. Workers passed out and got dragged outside to either recover or die. Nobody called a doctor. Doctors cost money. One woman near you is coughing up blood. Probably tuberculosis, which was rampant because everyone was crammed together sharing disgusting air. TB was a death sentence. No antibiotics, no treatment, just slowly wasting away over months. And she's still working, because if she goes home, she doesn't get paid. And if she doesn't get paid, her family starves. This is hour 8 of 16. Now let's talk about how different factory types would specifically destroy you because not all death traps were created equal. Match factories used white phosphorus to make matches light easily. Seems harmless? White phosphorus is incredibly toxic, and workers breathed it every day. The resulting condition was called quote 1, when phosphorus literally rots your jawbone from inside out. Your teeth fall out. Gums turn black and bleed. Then your jawbone decays and glows in the dark. Yeah, glows green. Eventually your face collapses inward as the bone disintegrates. The only treatment was surgically removing your entire jaw, which most people died from anyway, and they still had to show up for shifts. Textile mills had, quote, 2 cotton dust so thick you could barely see across the floor. Every breath filled your lungs with microscopic fibers, like breathing thousands of tiny needles every day for years. Within months, you'd develop chronic cough. Within years, your lungs would be so damaged you couldn't breathe without wheezing. The medical term is bisonosis, but workers called it mill cough. It was a death sentence. No cure, no treatment, just slowly suffocating over a decade. About 50% of textile workers developed lung disease. Half. Coal plants were even worse. Black lung turned miners' lungs into solid scar tissue. Even above-ground sorting facilities were deadly from coal dust. Workers coughed up black mucus for their shortened lives. Oh, and the explosions. Coal dust is extremely flammable, so factories would occasionally just explode, killing everyone inside. No warning. Just boom. Chemical factories played with substances nobody understood. Sulfuric acid, mercury, lead, arsenic, all handled without gloves or masks or any protection. Workers got chemical burns that never healed, mercury poisoning that made them insane. lead exposure that destroyed their brains. There's a reason the phrase quote 3 exists. Hat makers used mercury in felting and slowly went insane from fumes. Tremors, hallucinations, personality changes, death. All so Victorian gentlemen could have nice hats. Factory owners knew these chemicals were dangerous. They just didn't care because protective equipment cost money and dead workers were cheap to replace. Speaking of equipment, there was none. No gloves when handling acid, no masks when breathing toxic fumes, no goggles with caustic chemicals. Just bare hands and faces exposed to substances that would be hazardous waste today. Temperature control? Forget it. Summer factories hit 110 degrees from machinery and furnaces with zero ventilation. Workers passed out from heat stroke and got dragged outside. Winter was freezing because heating cost money, so workers suffered through it, handling frozen metal with bare hands. The truly insane part? Children got the worst jobs because their small hands fit into tight machine spaces. So kids literally climbed inside active machinery to clear jams, and when they got caught and crushed, the factory just hired another kid. Today we have OSHA, safety equipment, ventilation standards, hazmat protocols. Back then, Victorian workers just dealt with whatever industrial poison was killing them and kept their mouths shut. But let's say you somehow survive the physical dangers and toxic chemicals. Surely you'd get paid well for risking your life every day. Ha! No. A male textile worker earned about 10 shillings per week. That's roughly $60 today for 80 hours of work, less than $1 an hour to operate death machines in a toxic hellscape. And it gets worse. Women doing the exact same job got half. 5 shillings per week. Children got even less, sometimes 2 shillings for a full week. So a family of 4 working the same factory would earn maybe 20 shillings weekly while risking death every single day. Now expenses, because this is where Victorian factories reveal themselves as the scam they truly were. Most workers were forced into company housing. The owner built terrible overcrowded tenements next to the factory and rented them to workers. And by quote 4, I mean the cost was automatically deducted from wages before you ever saw money. A typical company house cost about 3 shillings per week for one room you'd share with your entire family. That's 15% of your wages gone before buying a single piece of food. But it gets better. Many factories operated the quote 5, paying you in tokens instead of real money. Those tokens only worked at the company store, which charged massively inflated prices for everything. Bread that cost 1 penny at a regular shop, 3 pence at the company store. Milk, cheese, coal, all marked up 200 to 300%. Workers were trapped earning fake money only good at the store robbing them blind. Let me break down the math. Male worker earning 10 shillings per week, 3 shillings deducted for housing, 4 shillings on food at inflated prices, 1 shilling on coal, 1 shilling on clothes that wore out constantly, 1 shilling on miscellaneous like candles and soap. That's 10 shillings. You've spent everything and saved 0, and that's if nothing goes wrong. Get sick and miss work, immediately in debt to the company. Break a tool, fined and in debt. Late because you're dying of dysentery? Fined and in debt. Workers were perpetually in debt to the factory owner, which meant they couldn't quit even if they wanted because they owed money. Victorian debt slavery with extra steps. And those fines? Insane. Factories had entire rule books with fines attached to everything. Talking during work? Fined 2 pence. Singing? Fined. Bathroom break over 3 minutes? Fined. Window open without permission? Fined. 1 minute late? Fined. Some workers finished a week of brutal labor only to discover they owed the company money after fines. The most absurd part? Factory owners were getting obscenely wealthy. While workers starved in tenements, the owner lived in a countryside mansion with servants. A large mill owner could earn £10,000 per year, equivalent to $1.5 million today. So the owner's annual income equals 400 workers' lifetime earnings. And those workers are dying in his factory while he sips champagne and complains about entitled laborers. After 16 hours, you'd stumble out exhausted, poisoned, having literally paid money for the privilege of being there. You'd go to your one-room company house, eat stale bread from the company store, and try to sleep 5 hours before doing it all again. And when workers couldn't take it anymore, the factories found even darker ways to keep operating. March 25th, 1911. Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York. Saturday afternoon, about 600 workers, mostly young immigrant women and girls, are finishing their shift on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors. Then, someone's cigarette ignites fabric scraps. Within minutes, the 8th floor is engulfed. Workers rush to exits and discover something horrifying. The doors are locked from the outside. Factory owners had been locking doors to prevent unauthorized breaks or fabric theft. So, 146 people burned to death or jumped from 10 stories because their bosses wanted to prevent bathroom breaks. The youngest victim was 14. Some tried the fire escape, but it collapsed under their weight, sending dozens plummeting to pavement. Others tried elevators, but they stopped working after a few trips. The lucky ones made it down the single working staircase before it became impassable. The rest burned alive or chose to jump. Firefighters arrived within minutes, but their ladders only reached the 6th floor. So they stood on the street and watched as young women lined up at windows, held hands, and jumped together. Witnesses said you could hear bodies hitting pavement from blocks away. Here's what makes this worse. The owners, Max Blank and Isaac Harris, escaped by climbing to the roof. They survived without a scratch, while 146 employees died because of their policies. The trial? Both acquitted of manslaughter. The judge ruled prosecution couldn't prove they knew doors were locked, even though literally everyone knew doors were always locked. Each was later sued and had to pay compensation. The amount? $75 per victim. $75 per human life. Meanwhile, the owners had insurance and actually profited from the fire. They collected insurance money exceeding their losses and opened another factory, which also had locked doors. But Triangle wasn't unique. Factory disasters killed hundreds yearly across industrialized nations, building collapses from overcrowding, explosions from accumulated dust or gas, mass poisonings from chemical leaks. Fire, 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 because Victorian buildings were basically kindling. A cotton mill in England in 1880 killed 53 workers when the building collapsed. They'd been cramming 800 workers into space designed for 200. The owner knew floors were sagging, just didn't care. A flour mill explosion in Minnesota in 1878 killed 18 workers. Flour dust is incredibly explosive, which everyone knew, but ventilation cost money, so they risked it. Chemical factory explosions were routine. Workers complained about gas buildup or strange smells. Foremen told them, "Get back to work." Then boom, everyone dead. The truly insane part is how owners responded. They didn't improve safety, didn't unlock doors or install fire escapes or reduce overcrowding. Instead, they took out life insurance policies on workers. That's right. Owners insured workers' lives, then collected payouts when they died in accidents. The owner made money when workers died. Literal financial incentive to maintain dangerous conditions. Records show some owners collected thousands of pounds yearly in death benefits while paying families nothing. Worker dies in preventable accident. Owner collects £50 from insurance. Widow gets zero. When coroners held inquests, the verdicts were almost always, quote, 6, quote, or, quote, 7, quote, absolving owners of responsibility. Even when negligence was obvious, juries packed with wealthy businessmen refused to convict fellow factory owners. One owner whose fire killed 31 workers was found not guilty because, quoting the verdict, quote, 8. The fire started because there were no safety protocols and one exit. But sure, blame the victims. Across Britain and America during peak industrialization, factories killed approximately 1,000 workers yearly. And that's just officially recorded deaths. The actual number was way higher because many deaths were covered up or listed as something else. Children's deaths, especially, were treated as business costs. Factory owners had a term, quote, 9. They calculated how many workers they'd lose per year to accidents and disease, factored it into operating costs, and kept hiring replacements. A child dying was treated with the same concern as a broken machine. Actually less, because machines cost money. Government inspectors were rare and useless. Manchester, in the 1840s, had hundreds of factories employing tens of thousands, but exactly 4 inspectors. 4 guys monitoring an entire industrial city. And when inspectors showed up, owners just bribed them or threatened them. If an inspector tried enforcing regulations, owners used political connections to get him fired. The system protected profits, not people. Workers who complained got blacklisted. Owners kept lists of troublemakers and shared them with other factories. Complain about locked doors or toxic fumes or lack of safety equipment? You'd never work in that industry again. And in company towns where the factory was the only employer, blacklisting meant starvation. Some owners hired thugs to intimidate complainers. Beaten in alleys for mentioning 16-hour child shifts weren't great. Threatened at home for suggesting unlocked fire exits might be smart, but here's the darkest part. Some owners took out life insurance on workers. They'd insure employees' lives, then collect payouts when those employees died in industrial accidents. The owner literally profited from deaths. Think about that. You're working in a death trap. Your boss knows it. Your boss could fix problems but won't because safety costs money. When you die from those unsafe conditions, your boss collects insurance while your family gets nothing. Records show wealthy owners collected thousands of pounds yearly in life insurance payouts. A single factory might generate £500 in death benefits annually while paying 0 worker compensation. Make textiles, kill workers, collect insurance. Rinse, repeat. The legal system was rigged for owners. When workers sued for injuries or families sued for wrongful death, they almost never won. Juries were property owners and businessmen with vested interests in protecting factory owners from liability. Documented case. Worker lost both arms in machine accident due to obvious negligence. Factory removed a safety guard to speed production. Worker sued. Jury found for the owner because, quoting the verdict, quote, 11. That became standard defense. Quote, 12. By agreeing to work, you legally accepted all possible dangers, including death. So owners had 0 liability for even obviously preventable accidents. Another trick? Blame the victim. Worker gets scalped by unfenced belt. Factory argues carelessness. Child crushed in machinery. Should have been more alert. Someone dies from toxic fumes with 0 ventilation. Should have held their breath. And it worked. Courts consistently sided with owners over dead and injured workers. Famous quote from British owner John Bright when confronted about death tolls. Quote 13. He said the quiet part out loud. These people viewed workers as disposable machinery, and Victorian society largely agreed. Newspapers wrote editorials about factory work building character. Politicians gave speeches about industrialization being Britain's destiny. Churches preached suffering in this life would be rewarded in the next. The entire system extracted maximum labor from human bodies while providing minimum protections, and when those bodies broke down or died, they were simply replaced. But workers weren't just victims. They fought back. First major strike was Lowell, Massachusetts in 1834, when female textile workers walked out protesting wage cuts. The unquote 14 organized one of America's first labor actions. Owners tried breaking the strike by threatening eviction from company housing and blacklisting. The strike failed. Most workers had to return because they couldn't afford to stay out, but it planted a seed. Britain's Factory Act of 1833 passed after years of activism and outcry. It set minimum working age at 9 years old. Yeah, 9. That was progressive reform. The act also limited children under 13 to 8 hours daily and required 2 hours education. Owners immediately ignored it. But the law existed, which meant workers had something to point to. Inspectors, even corrupt ones, occasionally had to pretend to care. And slowly, things began changing. The Match Girls' strike of 1888 in London was a turning point. Young women at Bryant and May Match Factory were dying from phossy jaw while earning starvation wages. They were fined for everything: talking, bathroom breaks, having dirty feet. One girl was fined for an untidy workbench while actively dying from phosphorus poisoning. So they walked out. 1,400 women and girls went on strike. Owners thought it would collapse in days. Women strikers had no money, no union support, and public opinion was against them because, quote, 15 didn't make scenes. But match girls held firm, organized picket lines, gave newspaper interviews, refused to back down. After 3 weeks, owners caved. Workers won better pay, end to the fine system, and improved safety. One of the first major victories for unskilled workers in British history. More importantly, it proved organization could work. Union organizing accelerated through the late 1800s and early 1900s. Workers formed trade unions despite it being illegal in many places. Coordinated strikes across multiple factories, published pamphlets exposing conditions, started electing labor-friendly politicians who actually cared about worker safety. Britain's Factory Act of 1878 raised minimum working age to 10 and limited children under 14 to half-time work. The 1901 Factory and Workshop Act further restricted child labor and mandated basic safety equipment in certain industries. In America, individual states passed safety laws. New York mandated fire escapes and unlocked exits after Triangle. Massachusetts required machine guards on certain equipment. These laws were weak and poorly enforced, but they existed. Reformers like Florence Kelley and Lewis Hine documented conditions with photography and reporting. Hine's photos of child laborers particularly shocked the public. Seeing actual images of 6-year-olds in coal mines made it harder to ignore. By the 1910s and 1920s, labor unions had enough power to force real concessions. The 8-hour workday became standard in many industries. Workers' compensation laws passed, meaning employers had to pay for job injuries. Child labor was increasingly restricted, though it took until 1938 for federal law to effectively ban it in America. Britain passed the Factory Act of 1937, consolidating all previous safety legislation and creating stricter inspection. Suddenly, fencing on machinery was mandatory. Ventilation standards existed. Maximum hours were legally enforced. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration wasn't created in America until 1970. In Britain, the Health and Safety at Work Act came in 1974. over a century after the worst abuses began. It took more than 100 years of workers dying, striking, organizing, and fighting for basic protections to become law. Generations sacrificed their health, safety, and lives so modern workers could have safety guards on machines and the right to sue for negligence. So, could you actually survive 24 hours in a Victorian factory? Honestly? No, absolutely not. You're physically too soft. Victorian workers had bodies conditioned by lifetimes of hard labor and malnutrition. You get winded walking upstairs. Your hands would blister and bleed within an hour handling rough materials. Your back would give out from standing 16 hours straight, and the first breath of that toxic air would have you coughing so hard you couldn't work. You're mentally too weak. Victorian workers showed up the day after watching co-workers die and kept working because they had no choice. You called in sick with slight headaches. They worked through broken bones, fevers, infections. You need mental health days after stressful meetings. You couldn't handle the hunger. Victorian workers ate one meal of bread and watery soup daily and considered themselves lucky. You get cranky if lunch is 30 minutes late. They went days without protein. You panic if your phone battery dies. You'd quit the moment someone said no bathroom breaks. Victorian workers held it for 16 hours or peed in corners when foremen weren't looking. You need clean bathrooms every 2 hours minimum. The noise alone would break you. 120 decibels for 16 hours with no ear protection would have you in tears within an hour. Victorian children worked through it. You can't focus when someone's music is too loud. Let's talk numbers. Average Victorian factory worker life expectancy was about 40 years. Today, it's nearly 80. Victorian workers had injury rates above 50%. More than half were seriously injured during their careers. Modern workplace injury rates are below 1%. Victorian workers put in 80 to 100 hours weekly. You work 40 and complain it's too much. They had 0 days off except maybe Christmas. You get weekends, paid vacation, sick leave. Victorian children started working at ages 5 to 7. Modern child labor is illegal. A Victorian 12-year-old had more calluses, scars, and work experience than most modern 30-year-olds. They were tougher, harder, and more resilient than you could imagine. And here's the sobering part. Hundreds of thousands died to build the industrial prosperity we enjoy. They died in factory fires, from toxic exposure, from machinery accidents, from exhaustion and disease. Their bodies literally built the modern world. Every safety regulation we have, fire exits, machine guards, OSHA standards, workers' comp, the 8-hour day, the weekend, exists because workers fought, bled, and died for them. Match girls who struck with rotting jaws. Textile workers who organized despite being beaten and blacklisted. Reformers who documented horrors until society couldn't ignore them. Yeah, you wouldn't last 24 hours in a Victorian factory, but you don't have to, because those workers already did the suffering for you. They endured hell so their children and grandchildren wouldn't have to. They died so you could have workplace safety laws, labor rights, and the luxury of complaining about your air-conditioned office. Pretty crazy when you think about it. And if you think Victorian factories were bad, wait until you hear about Victorian mental asylums. But that's a story for another time.